Hi, welcome to Fierce Conversations with Toby, where we tackle the hard topics with compassion, courage, and candor. I'm Toby Dorr, and today we're diving into one of the most critical themes we've explored in Season 1: the criminal justice system. Through the voices of my incredible guests, we'll uncover the systemic challenges, personal stories, and the fierce determination it takes to create change. We began the season by talking about the human cost of incarceration. In episode 1, I spoke with Justin Brooks, a founder of the California Innocence Project, who shared this heartbreaking reality.
One that kicks off my new book, You Might Go to Prison Even Though You're Innocent, is that 27 years ago, I was a law professor in Michigan, just having a nice little life, teaching law and living in East Lansing, Michigan. And I'd given up my practice as a criminal defense attorney in Washington, D.C. To have this quiet academic life. And I read about a woman on death row in Chicago who had been sentenced to death on a plea bargain. And
That's
I didn't.
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that sentence makes no sense, right? That you could
Mhm.
be sentenced to death on a plea bargain. And so I set up a meeting with her on death row. She was scheduled to be executed. And she told me that she was innocent. So
Mm.
I said, "You're innocent. You pled guilty and you're going to be executed." Yes. So I went back to the law school where I was teaching and I told exactly that to my students. I said, "There's this woman on death row. She's 21 years old. She's sentenced to be executed. She says she's innocent. Who wants to help me out?" And 4 kids raised their hands. And that night we sat around my kitchen table and we started going through the police reports. And, that case changed the entire trajectory of my life. I ended up
Mhm.
getting her death sentence reversed. I quit my job as a tenured faculty member out in Michigan, and I moved to California and I started the California Innocence Project. And since then, that's what I've been doing. I've been investigating claims of innocence of people in prison,
Mhm.
working on those cases with law students to use the cases to train them to be good
Mhm.
lawyers. And I've been lucky enough to walk 37 innocent people out of prison in the time I've been doing
I
that.
think that's just beautiful. There is, one thing I learned through my own journey through the justice system is that it's not just. There's all kinds of idiosyncrasies and unfairnesses, and I think it's awesome that there's a group out there who tries to right those wrongs. So you might go to prison even though you're innocent. What a title. How did that title come to you?
Yeah, that's a great question that no one's asked me before. I guess I've been talking about this topic for so long. I've been teaching about it for so long. I've given hundreds of lectures on it. I've done all these cases. And, really that's the summation of all of it. And it's funny. I literally have in my own head what would be my plan if I went to prison because I've seen so many innocent people in prison that I know that
Mhm.
could happen to me, could happen to
Right.
anybody. And,
Yeah.
my plan, by the way, which is not one that everybody could use, but is that, on the first day in prison, I would gather all the shot callers, all the gang leaders on the yard, and I'd say, "I'm going to be your lawyer and your lawyer and your lawyer and your lawyer." Like,
That's an excellent plan. I love it.
keep all these other
Yeah,
dudes
talk
away
about
from me.
yes, that's right. Talk about it having an easy life in there. That'd be the way to go.
Yeah, if I
So,
can pull that off.
yeah. Well, hopefully you never have to, because
Hopefully I
it's
won't. But
certainly
again,
not a fun place to be. You never know.
you
Honestly, you
never
never
know, and
know.
that's what the
Mhm.
book is all about. So the book is divided into 10 sections of kind of the 10 themes I've seen in my career of what lead innocent people to prison, and many of them are just
Mhm.
unavoidable.
Yeah.
Some are avoidable, like I've got a chapter on all the baby death cases that I've dealt with, and yeah, if you
Mhm.
never have children, or you don't allow children in your home, or you don't operate, as a daycare provider, if you spend the rest of your life staying away from children, I guess you could avoid that wrongful conviction. But I've seen
Mhm.
daycare providers, parents, all kinds of people wrongfully convicted in baby death cases that were misdiagnosed. I talk about
Wow.
that if you live in rural areas, often the police don't have the capacity to process homicide scenes, so they make all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
mistakes. If you live in the
Mm-hmm.
inner city, lots of those neighborhoods are over policed. And so that leads
Mm-hmm.
up to wrongful convictions.
Right. And they're just looking for somebody to put something on. So yeah,
Yeah. And
you're
then the
right.
leading cause of wrongful conviction is unavoidable for all of us because the number one cause of wrongful conviction in the United States is misidentification. And my
Mm.
chapter on that is called You Sort of Look Like Other People in the World. Because
Misidentification is the number one cause of wrongful conviction. And this message set the tone for a season-long exploration of how deeply the system impacts us all. We shared some stories of resilience, and one of the most memorable episodes was episode 6, They Wanted Justice, where Chris Turner and 4 of his friends, who were wrongly convicted of the same crime, shared their journey through the prison system and their quest for true justice. These men could have taken deals that would have gotten them drastically shorter prison sentences, but they refused. They weren't looking for mercy, they wanted justice, and their principles wouldn't let them plead guilty to a crime they didn't commit. Listen to what it feels like to be falsely convicted.
Charles' thinking wasn't incorrect. You know, it wasn't up and until the DC Parole Board changed their guidelines and recognized actual innocence in their guidelines in 2007 that you could actually be paroled without admitting guilt, because they understood in 2007 that there was a such thing as wrongful conviction. Initially, you could never be paroled. In fact, Calvin Alston, Harry Bennett, and some of the other guys that actually falsely testified against us, they were denied parole because they kept telling the parole board they were innocent. And so they kept being denied at their initial hearings. And it wasn't until they said, okay, well, if I want to get out here, I'm going to go in there and just say I did it. And I'm going to lie to them because I lied on the stand. So I'm used to lying, and so they went in there and that's what they had to do. But in our situation, we told them in a letter prior to me actually seeing the parole board that I would not be admitting guilt, that I would not be accepting responsibility, even though I had remorse for Mrs. Fuller's family, the community, my family. All these are victims. And I got remorse for all the victims in them. But I will not be admitting guilt into something that I didn't do.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. And I know that you guys could have gotten a 2 to 6 year sentences if you would have said you were guilty at the very beginning, and none of you would do that. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that just speaks to your integrity and your belief in not letting yourselves become what they were trying to paint you as. So I think,
but I just go ahead, fella. Go ahead.
And it's probably with the belief that we in no way, shape, form, or fashion ever thought that we would be convicted. None of us.
I'm sure you didn't.
That.
Yeah.
I'm not in the mind. I wasn't in the minds of all the guys, but I guarantee you, everybody thought, man, they're gonna get this right. They're gonna realize it wasn't me. You ain't gonna let me, But it didn't happen.
I'm sure.
And the thing about it is,
you knew you were innocent. Yeah. So,
and the thing about it is that, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to say that should have been some type of wake up to the lawyers that were supposed to be representing us, or to the community, that these guys won't plead guilty to this amount of pressure. There was no case that they amounted the amount of pressure that was amounted in this case. And none of the guys even thought, they didn't even think for 1 second of accepting a plea deal. Everybody said no from the beginning. Even when the jury was out deliberating and had trouble for like 7 days, they out trying to deliberate, they still was trying to offer us plea deals. And the guy said no. So that just goes to support what Charles was just saying about everybody thought they was going. Nobody even considered, and who would not consider a plea deal of 6 years for a crime of this magnitude?
Right.
And then you as a prosecutor, if you thought these guys was the monsters that you made them out to be, who would come to them and offer them a plea of 6 years?
I agree. That's a pretty lenient sentence for the crime that was committed. And I think it probably shows that they didn't really think they could convict you.
The way that we make a difference is we have to ask Congress to hold the justice system accountable. We need to talk about fairness and not the law. We have to talk about what happened.
And people just in the society, they just took that government side and they convicted us off the break. It went all that proven guilty until we was already guilty. Before our trial started, before we picked jury, we was already guilty.
Right. And the newspaper doesn't help.
They were just waiting to get us in the courtroom to say we was guilty. We was already guilty.
Right.
They were just waiting to get us in the courtroom as a whole. We was already guilty before we went in the courtroom.
These personal stories remind us that while the system may break people down, it cannot destroy their spirit. We also talked with people who are trying to break the cycle of our criminal justice system. We looked at solutions. In episode 28, I Am Enough, I had the honor of speaking with Tanine Jenkins, who works to break the cycle of incarceration through education and mentorship.
You either have to go in a worse direction or totally redirect your life and go in a complete different direction, I think.
Absolutely. Either you're going to come out worse than what you went,
yes,
or better.
But you can't come out the same. It's not possible.
But you can't come out the same.
Yeah. I thought when I got out of prison, I'd just go back home and drop right back into my life and just pick up where we left off. But it doesn't work that way, because for us in prison, life kind of stops, it stalls. But for people outside in your life, your family members and friends, their lives go on and you're not a part of it. And you can't just, that gap is a gap, and you've got to adjust and fit in a different way than you did before you left. Yeah.
Exactly. Like you said, your lives go on, ours stop.
Yes, yes. So recently I saw you on an interview where you talked about your sentence, and I thought that was so powerful. So can you tell us what that interview was about and that concept about your sentence?
So a lot of people don't understand that when people get out of prison, that is not when their sentence ends. And it's been deemed a second sentence. So when people are released, whether it's in prison or jail, they are continually serving another sentence, which is being sentenced to live below the poverty line, being sentenced to low-paying jobs and homelessness, and being exiled from their families or communities. So it's so much further than what the judge gives us, or what the deal that we make. It's never ending. It's like once a felon, always a felon.
Education is the key. When we give people the tools to succeed, we're not just reducing recidivism, we're building a stronger society.
You're passionate about equipping reentry programs with the tools needed to help reduce the recidivism rate, as well as providing clients with the knowledge and power to succeed. And I've written down some of the things that you think are important in a reentry program. And one of them is to help people change their mindset. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So in 2000, so I went to prison in 2010, came home at 12, and 8 years later, in 2020, I was still in this funk, I guess. I was in a rut. And what it was is that the stigma of being a felon was weighing heavy on me. And I felt like I couldn't do the things that I did before prison. So I went to prison. When I went to prison, I was in college to get my computer networking and telecommunications degree. I was a business analyst making upward of $60,000 a year.
Mhm.
And when I came home, I didn't have access to any of that any longer. And therefore, I believed what society said about me. I believed that I wasn't enough, that I wouldn't succeed, that, prison was the end of my life, basically. So when you have that mindset, you're stuck and you cannot move forward. And so when you change that mindset, when you are able to see past your past, basically, or even past where you are at that moment, then that's when you begin to grow. And that's when things begin to happen. In 2020, a friend of mine, no, it was 2021, a friend of mine said, Tanae, one day I hope you feel like you're enough. And that's when I realized I didn't feel like I was enough.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. I remember in one of my counseling sessions, my counselor asked me, what would you tell the old Toby if you could give her a message? And I said, I would tell her she's enough. I mean, I think that's so important. And then I saw that that was one of your messages. So I really felt a connection there because so many of us think that we are not enough. And the truth is we can always become more, but we are enough as we are. We're worthy of something.
It's voices like these that inspire hope and point the way toward meaningful reform.
So many ways to help someone who's getting out of prison. And, one of the most obvious ways I think is for employers to be open to considering hiring a felon.
Yes,
so many people who come out of prison are good, decent people who can make a difference in the world. And I think if you give a felon an employment opportunity, you will probably find that they're going to become one of the best employees you have because they know how precious that opportunity is and they don't want to jeopardize it.
I have it. My friends asked me, why do I work so hard? I said, because I know what it's like not to be able to work. I know what it's like not to be able to have the opportunity. I worked 2 or 3 jobs. I don't have to do anything out, but I would work 2 or 3 jobs because I know what it's like to get I know what it's like to be walked out of a job because of my background came back. And they thought that, I had this blemish on my background. I know what it's like. So I'm going to make sure that I am an upstanding and outstanding employee.
Yes.
That's just what it is. Because when we get the opportunity to show what we have or show what we can do, then we're going to make the best of that opportunity. And kids hiring is a big push right now. And it should have always been a big push. I also say that, like I was saying before, when we went to prison, we had this skill set. We didn't lose the skill set when we came home.
Right.
I still am a data person. I still am a business analyst. I still have that mindset. My skills say go away, but yet I can't get a position in that field because it's more so it's banking and private education. So I understand.
Yeah. So I love what you say. Because of my past mistakes, I can help others in their process. So it doesn't take them years to feel like they are enough. That is such a powerful message.
Tanine tells us that when she began to tell her story, she got stronger. And that's true for everyone out there. We all have stories to tell.
You have an organization called Everything I Am. Can you tell us about that organization and your mission?
So Everything I Am started when my friend said, one day I hope you feel like you're enough. And I started to think, and I was like, if I don't feel like I'm enough, I'm sure there are many other people that have been in my shoes or that are in my shoes that don't feel like they're enough either. So I just wanted to start a clothing line, just a confidence boosting clothing line with just inspirational or confidence boosting messages on them. Like, I am enough. I am everything. I am more than enough. I am everything and then some. And when I started the clothing line and it started to do really well, I was like, okay, what's next? And another friend, you gotta have good friends.
That's right. They make all the difference.
They do. Another friend, they were like, you really should speak. And I was like, I guess I could. And I'm a spoken word poet, so I'm used to the stage, not an issue. And an ex of mine was telling my story, but was telling it wrong. And so I would have to go and correct the wrong telling of my story. And when I started to tell my story, I began to get stronger and I began to get freer. And it was a healthy thing. And so everything I am took a different direction. And I began to speak. And I received my public speaking certification in 2022. And even before I received my certification, I was speaking on the steps of the Florida Capitol. And that's how it all started.
Keep your eye on Tanine Jenkins because this woman is shaking things up. She's going places and she's making change happen. Since I had her on my podcast, she's been a TEDx speaker. She's talked at a convention in Alaska. She's doing all kinds of unbelievable, remarkable things. And boy, I wish I could do half as much as what she's doing. So be sure you keep your eye on her. Season 1 just wasn't about storytelling. It was about action. From advocating for policy changes to volunteering with local reentry programs, my guests showed us how we can all play a role in transforming the criminal justice system. In episode 5, When Innocence is Not Enough, we talked with Thomas Dibdahl about his new book.
In particular, you take on the Brady Rule. In 1963, the Supreme Court decreed the prosecution must share favorable information with the defense on the premise that the United States wins its point whenever justice is done. Well, that sure sounds noble, but what went wrong?
Well, it was a great idea, but almost everything went wrong.
Mm.
To start with, the courts who adopted this rule initially, the Supreme Court, even its members were divided about the rule and what it meant. And very quickly, because the law always is evolving, what it really means is what the courts say it means in specific cases. So what happened fairly quickly, instead of saying, all right, this really means that the prosecution, when they find favorable evidence for the defense, they have to turn it over. They started narrowing the rule. They started changing how it was applied. And very quickly, it became something very narrow. And then they didn't really enforce it. Even when when prosecutors failed to turn over evidence and it happened to come out, they said, oh, you shouldn't have done that. But they really didn't do much. And really, without going into too much detail, the key problem was they said, for a real Brady violation, the evidence has to be material to guilt or punishment. And the way they define material, which is a reasonable probability of a different outcome, is so slippery and vague that you can basically justify any decision. You could just say, there might have been a probability that if this evidence had been shared, it would have changed the results. But we don't know if it's a reasonable probability. So no harm, no foul. And that's what happens over and over in these cases. So prosecutor, there's no enforcement. So why do it?
Yeah, I could see that. And the wording just has really devolved into something that anybody can find a loophole in it, which isn't very effective.
Absolutely. And particularly because prosecutors understandably are not in love with this rule. It tells them that, they're in the middle of a case, they're prosecuting someone they think is guilty, and suddenly they find some evidence that maybe suggests the person might be innocent. Well, they don't want to turn over that evidence to the other side and help them win, help them lose a case. And so they're inclined not to do it anyway. And because they control the information, it's simple to do. And many, many, many times we likely never know that the evidence ever existed.
You don't have to do something big to make a difference. Sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest impact. Thank you for joining me on this journey through some of the most powerful moments from Season 1. Criminal justice reform isn't just a conversation, it's a movement. Let's keep the momentum going together. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear these stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more fierce conversations in 2025. Until next time, stay fierce.